Hi, I'm Gretchen Winter, the Executive Director of the Center for Professional Responsibility in Business and Society here at the University of Illinois College of Business. We're very pleased to welcome Bill O'Rourke, a retired Vice President of Alcoa, as our Leighton Lecturer. The Leighton Lecture is held each year to discuss issues of ethics and leadership. It's sponsored by Dick and Grace Leighton, graduates of the University of Illinois, and we're grateful to them for the opportunity to bring speakers like Bill O'Rourke to our campus.
Today I thought I could give some opening comments, give you a brief overview of Alcoa, and the idea is I'd like to explain to you what kind of a corporation it was, its size, its operation, et cetera, and I'll focus a little on Alcoa's investment in Russia and the opportunities and challenges that I had there. Then I want to get into very specific business ethics situations and ask you, what would you do in these cases? So hopefully we'll be interactive after that. And then I'll give a suggested approach for whenever you do face ethical issues. I titled the talk, Does Your Moral Compass Face to True North? I love a compass. A compass is a great tool. If you put it on a level plane, it always points north. That's a good tool to have if you've ever lost your way. Well, the moral compass works the same way. It's inside all of us, and it points north. It tells us which direction to take. The issue is, can we follow it? Can we get ourselves out of trouble sometimes? So think about the moral compass when I get into some of the issues, especially the ethical dilemmas. Alcoa is a big organization. In 2012, their revenue was $24 billion. They operate in 31 countries, 181 locations, 61,000 employees. All those numbers were about double before they had the recession in 2008. Alcoa at one time had 143,000 employees. They operated in 43 countries, had revenue of $35 billion. The current recession hit the aluminum industry hard. It hit Alcoa very hard. But they found their way through that. They're now being profitable. In fact, tonight, at the close of business, Alcoa will issue its earnings for the quarter. Alcoa is the first corporation to issue earnings. I remember I had the privilege of working for Paul O'Neill. When Paul came to the company, before he was Secretary of Treasury, he was at Alcoa from 1987 to the year 2000. I'll talk about him a bit, and he was the most enlightened leader that I've known in my life. He really focused on safety, but he also focused on theoretical limits in all areas. And he used to ask people, what's the best you could do? His vision for our corporation was to be the best company in the world, but he used to ask everyone, what's the best you could do? So in the closing of the books, he goes to the controller in his first year at Alcoa, says, how fast do you close the books? He said, we close those books in 16 days. We release our earnings on the morning of the 17th. And he said, well, if you had no impediments, no barriers at all, how fast could you close the books? And the controller said 3 days. He said, okay, that's your target. Close the books in 3 days. He said, I can't close them in 3 days. He says, why not? He said, we don't have a common chart of accounts. He said, okay, come to my office tomorrow morning. We'll have that by noon. So there's a common chart of accounts in Alcoa, and all the locations use the same chart. He said, but I don't have a common system. He said, we have to pick SAP or Oracle. May as well pick Oracle. We'll have that installed in 9 months. He said, okay, 9 months from now, close the books in 3 days. He said, what else are your problems? He said, I got a problem. I better get out of here and start working on it. And sure enough, 9 months later, Alcoa closed the books in 3 working days. And the rules were no early cutoffs, no accruals, hard close. And Alcoa comes out now first on the earnings report, which is pretty interesting. Inside the company, they actually close their books now in 1 day, which is hard because it's already tomorrow in Australia. So you have to have rules on what's 1 day, and then they use 2 days for the analysis, and then release the earnings. Pretty good. But what drives this is an enlightened leader. And that's what we had in Alcoa. We were fortunate. Alcoa was involved in all phases of the aluminum operation, from the mining and refining of bauxite to the manufacture of finished products, semi-finished products, extrusions, castings, forging, sheet, plate. And Alcoa was in the locations that you see the dots all around the world. Alcoa is one of 61 survivors on the Fortune 500 list since its inception, which was 1956. So there's been a lot of mergers, disappearances, and others. Half of Alcoa's revenue is about in the United States and the others elsewhere. You can see in the Alcoa Russia locations, 3 of the locations I'll talk about later, that was their location. So an office in Moscow of about 700 people. The biggest operation in all of Alcoa was in the city of Samara, about 550 miles southeast of Moscow. Enormous operation, and one just about as big in the city of Belaya Kalitva in the Rostov region, about 700 or 800 miles directly south of Moscow. I'll talk about those later. Alcoa was founded in 1888 in Pittsburgh. Before, Alcoa found the new process. Their founder and inventor was Charles Martin Hall. He found a new way to make aluminum. Before that, aluminum was a very precious metal. Napoleon actually carried around an aluminum spoon that he used. When they tipped the Washington Monument in the year 1879, they wanted something precious to put on the top. And it was, and still is, aluminum at the very top of the Washington Monument. But it's not as precious any longer. The price then fell, and they found ways to use it, and Alcoa was born in 1888. Alcoa, I talked about revenues and employees. I'm asked sometimes to distinguish Alcoa from other corporations. I would say that it's Alcoa's value base, and they are a value-based company, beginning with integrity, but also through environment, health, and safety. In Alcoa, in 2012, it was 10 times safer than it was to work for Alcoa in 1992. And in 1992, they were one of the most safe manufacturing plants in the world. In the environmental side, they've cut their greenhouse gas emissions by 46% from 1990. Pretty big. And 22% since 2005. Now, in the aluminum industry, you have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Alcoa's emissions are about 60 million tons of CO2 equivalents a year. That's an awful lot. So they should be reducing it, but they are. And it is a value-driven company. Alcoa receives some accolades from others, from Maplecroft, from Covalence for their ethical ratings. Fortune as being one of America's most admired corporations. They've been on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index since its inception 10 years ago. They receive these accolades. Alcoa doesn't set goals to get them, but when they get them, they believe that they must be moving in the right direction. So these are confirmations that things are going correctly. Some exemplary aluminum products. In the upper left-hand corner, I have the ideal package of the world for beverages, the aluminum can. If you properly dispose of an aluminum can, it becomes an aluminum can again in 60 days. And then again in 60 days, and again in 60 days. Recyclability, that's what aluminum is about. In fact, since 1888, 750 million tons of aluminum have been made. Of that, 75% still in use today. No other material can make a claim like that. So the recyclability is important in aluminum because it costs 5% of the energy to make aluminum from recycled material than it does from bauxite ore. So it favors everybody to use the aluminum over and over and over again. Of course, airplanes are made of aluminum lithographic sheet, and everything that moves is being made more and more out of aluminum these days. And the reason is lightweighting. If you can lightweight the car, the boat, the truck, the wheel, you get better gas mileage, you spend less on the energy, and you conserve. So recyclability and lightweighting are really 2 of the premium qualities of Alcoa, both playing in the sustainability field and both saving money for the people who use it. Brazing sheets made of aluminum. And a new product that's being made is the oil and gas pipe that you see in the lower right-hand corner. They're now drilling to 7 miles of depth. When you get to those temperatures and pressures, the steel pipe that has been traditionally used gets brittle. But the aluminum pipe of certain alloys tends to remain ductile at those temperatures and pressures. So that's turning out to be a rather good product for the aluminum industry. Alcoa has a vision statement, as I mentioned. Alcoa aspires to be the best company in the world. They're not, but they aspire to be. I personally like this vision statement. We've all been in difficult meetings or difficult situations. In Alcoa, when that happens, someone in the room invariably says, what would the best company in the world do in this situation? And that drives some pretty good behavior. I kind of like that as a vision statement. Alcoa, like other corporations, has articulated values. It begins with integrity. Other corporations have values like this, right? So you can put anything on a piece of paper. But one value that's a little different than other corporations is environment, health, and safety, actually articulated as a value. And you don't see that in many corporations. DuPont definitely has health and safety as a value, and others do. If you have a value, you get results. These are the results. I start in the graph in 1987. That's the year that Paul O'Neill came to join Alcoa. Every word out of his mouth, every time he talked and every meeting that he had was safety. The first agenda item at the annual shareholders meeting, the board of directors meeting, the audit committee meeting, executive council meeting, first words are safety. He reviewed safety all the time. People thought he was phony at the beginning. He ran that with that value through his tenure, and you can see the results that he got over the time that he was there. Absolutely wonderful. And when he started, the lost workday rate was 1.86 in 1987. He brought it down to about 0.2 when he left the company. A tremendous result. And when he started, it was one of the safest companies in manufacturing. And he just decided that that's wrong, that we need to lead with health and safety. And he did. When he left the company, I remember asking him if he was a success. Paul O'Neill was a resounding success. He quadrupled the revenue. He bought the aluminum industries of Italy, Spain, Hungary. He bought Reynolds Metals Corporation, Alumax Corporation, Cordon Technologies. Just grew the company, and the revenue tripled over that same time period. Stock split 3 times in those 13 years. He was a resounding success. But his answer to that question was pretty interesting. He said, if the lost workday rate and the total recordable rate continue to fall long after I'm gone, I will have been a success. A kind of sustainability answer, a legacy answer. And it did. If you look at what happened over that time period, to the point that last year was the safest year on record at Alcoa. No employee had a fatality last year in Alcoa. Just amazing kind of leadership, I believe, from an enlightened leader, that he was able to leave a legacy like that. If you look at the total recordable rate, the red line, it blipped a little bit right after Paul O'Neill left the company. Alan Belda was made the CEO at that time, and he called me and said, Bill, come back into the Environment, Health, and Safety Department. I can't allow this to happen. You have all the support in the world. We're going to bring it back. And he did. He brought it back on track. And then later, when Klaus Kleinfeld was named the CEO of the company, called me again, said, Bill, I want you to be the head of the Environment, Health, and Safety Department. He was a German, not used to the Alcoa culture. He said, just handle it yourself. I said, oh, no, you're going to handle it. You're in charge. And here's what I mean by that. And I gave him the items. I will report directly to you. That will send a message. The first agenda item at the board meeting will be health and safety. You will give a health and safety report to the board at every meeting. Whenever I call you for help, you're going to help me. When somebody needs to be reprimanded or complimented for what they're doing, you're going to do that. And you're going to continue to support the health and safety audits, which he did. And to the point that last year was the safest year on record for the company. Pretty good results. So if you say something's of value, that's one thing. But when you get the results, isn't that something else? And I think that's what you really have to look for. Here's some good values for a corporation: respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. Anyone know what company that is? Enron Corporation. Yeah. Excellence in cooking the books, deceiving others, etc. What it says, the message is, you can write anything on a piece of paper. That doesn't matter. You need to look behind what's written on the piece of paper and see what kind of results you get. I'm currently looking at the articulated values of the Fortune 100 companies. I wrote all the companies on the piece of paper and then predicted what their values would be, that they say their values are. My number one was integrity. Everybody has to have integrity, correct? Or some form of it. Ethics, honesty. They have to articulate integrity. Well, 72 of the Fortune 100 companies articulate integrity. That says 28 don't. That's a shame. And they're good, big companies. Apple, GE, GM, Freddie Mac don't articulate some form of integrity. I have to look further. I'm just starting this study. But I want to find out why. Do they believe that it's embedded into their corporations, that they don't have to say integrity? I wonder. If so, that's wrong. I believe in the tone at the top, and I believe the tone at the top has to be audible. You must let people know what you believe in, and integrity has to be on that list. So I'm anxious to study this a little further. My original thought here was, I want to find ways to measure, are they doing what they say are their values? For example, if you say people are important, what's your retention rate? How many employees are giving you good grades on the employee engagement scores? What's your diversity like in the corporation? So I want to find measures to see if what they say is important actually is. So more to come on that. If something is of value, it's not a priority. If integrity is your value, you don't have an integrity meeting on Monday and then forget it the rest of the week. The same with safety. I've been in Paul O'Neill's company when a new CEO says, I'm going to make safety important like you have. So how much time should I spend on safety? And O'Neill's answer to that is 100%. And they say, I can't spend 100% on safety. Yes, you can. If it's a value, it's like breathing. How much time do you spend on integrity? And people say, oh, I have integrity all the time. Well, the same thing with your other values. If you really believe it, you have it all the time. I'm going to switch gears now and talk about Alcoa going to Russia. In 1996, Paul O'Neill was buying up the aluminum industries of other countries, went to Russia. He came back and said, the place is a cesspool. You can't do business there, and I won't send my employees there. How about that? 96. 2005, enough had changed that Alcoa thought they could do business there. Imagine the leadership challenges. Alcoa bought 2 big 50-year-old manufacturing facilities in Russia and a big office in Moscow. The CEO came to my office and said, we're buying these facilities. We need somebody to go to run it. I think you're the right person, but I know you won't go. I said, well, let me think about it. I'll come back tomorrow. I came back the next day. I said, it's the right time of my life. I would like that challenge. So Alan Belda says to me, that's great. Now I think you have no judgment. No one in their right mind would take that job. So with that endorsement, and I knew 2 Russian words, I knew da and niet, I took off for Russia. Imagine the cultural change that you have ahead of you. Imagine the challenges that are ahead of you. These facilities were big manufacturing facilities, 50 years old, have been neglected since perestroika. The safety was a disaster. Housekeeping was a mess. The first tour I took through the cast house, molten metal. There's people in there with no safety shoes, no heat-resistant clothing, no hard hats or safety goggles, walking over molten metal. It just turned my stomach. These 2 facilities averaged 5 fatalities a year, and their lost workday rate and total recordable rate were 10 times higher than the Alcoa average. Wow, what a challenge. Why would you even go to Russia? This shows the per capita consumption of aluminum in Russia. At the time, it was about 5 kilograms per person. In the Western world, it was closer to 30 kilograms per person. So we saw a lot of upside potential, especially in the aerospace market. If you've ridden any of the airplanes in Russia, you realize they're old. They still have the circular windows with the cloth that closes. They don't care if you put your seat back and trays in the upright position when they take off and land. They all need to be replaced, and they're projecting that there will be more passenger miles in Russia. So they see a lot of upside potential in the aerospace industry, and when the aerospace industry takes off, the aluminum industry follows it. So Alcoa is right behind and hoped that that would take off. The other was packaging. When I arrived in 2005, I did not see an aluminum can on the shelves, none. The reason was they didn't make can sheet in Russia, and if you made it elsewhere and brought it in, there was a 22% duty on the can sheet to bring it into Russia. So that's one of the reasons that Alcoa didn't make can sheet in Hungary and ship it into Russia, because we'd have a 22% duty on it, pretty high. But if we build the can plant in Russia, and our competitors now have a 22% disadvantage if Novelis in Europe wants to compete with us in Russia. So we saw that as a major competitive advantage and wanted to build that plant in the Samara area. So we saw a lot of upside potential there. In automotive and transportation, they really didn't care about gas mileage. And fuel was pretty plentiful, so that wasn't an advantage at the time. And we saw aluminum being used in transportation other than aerospace later, but not right away. The locations were the city of Samara, biggest manufacturing plant in all of Alcoa. This was a big, big plant. It sat on 388 acres. It had 129 buildings. There were 8,200 employees there. There were 400 women at that plant on maternity leave. I've learned the culture of Russia is a little different. When you have a child, you're expected to stay home for 2 or 3 years, not 6 weeks. So that's why there were so many women on maternity leave from the plant. They had the largest forging press in the world at this plant, the largest extrusion press in the world, a 5-stand rolling mill and 4 other rolling mills. This was one big operation, but it had been neglected since perestroika. It was in bad shape and needed a lot of refurbishment. The plant in Belaya Kalitva was almost as big, had 5,300 employees, had rolling mill, cast house, forging plant, casting operation. And located in Rostov region of Russia. So that's where we were located. The office in Moscow had sales, accounting, and human resources, and had about 600 or 700 people there. This was the Samara plant. It runs from one side of the screen to the other, from behind the soccer field to the tall stacks. It was really a big plant. When we bought these plants, we bought 100% of what they owned. When we did the inventory, we found out that we did own the soccer field. and the soccer team and the Philharmonic Hall and the Cultural Palace and 1,200 apartments in the city. So we took all of that and gave it back to the city and said, we have enough to focus on, you can have that. I did keep 2 seats at the soccer field, and I would go to the games every so often. They were called the Soviet Wings, Krylia Sovietov, and they were a bad team, but I enjoyed the games. That is the largest forging press in the world. In the foreground is a human being standing there. So you can see that's a big forging press. It stands 6 stories tall. For a forging press, you need to be a story deep for every story you are above ground to absorb the impact that you have. So that was one big piece of machinery. At the time I got there, you couldn't see the machine. There was so much garbage in the aisles. We took 40,000 tons of steel scrap out of the Samara plant in the first 6 months. I made more money on scrap sales than I did on product sales in those first 6 months. It was bad, and we really had to bring housekeeping into the plants. We had to bring some of the Alcoa values and new processes in, and we had to upgrade all of the facilities. That's the largest extrusion press in the world. That's where they're making that big drill pipe right now. They can make a string that's 200 meters long from this machine. That's really a big piece of equipment. I arrived in February, which was the muddy season. Once you get outside of Moscow and Samara and St. Petersburg, the roads aren't very good in Russia. Look at that pothole. We got 3 cars in that one pothole. Behind are those little buildings. You build garages of anything. If you don't put your car in a garage, it might not be there tomorrow. So again, it's interesting to learn cultures that you have when you get to go to other places. When I went to Russia, I was taught as I grew up that Russia was secular, totally secular. But some of the most beautiful cathedrals in the world are in this country. This is St. Basil's Cathedral that sits on the end of Red Square. It's gorgeous, and you can walk through and see some of the altars that they have, and it's just beautiful. That's the roof of a cathedral that sits behind the Kremlin wall. 3 of the most beautiful cathedrals in the world behind the Kremlin wall. I was never taught that. I decided where I should go was the city of Samara. So I took this picture on the Volga River as sunset one evening and decided to live in that city, in the city of Samara. It was absolutely beautiful. Nature was beautiful. The river was beautiful. And I decided I should live there. That's where the big plant was located. The people in Russia experience the cold in the winter months, so when it gets warm, they come out in droves on the beaches. So here, on any normal warm day, you'd have 25 or 30,000 people along the beaches of the river, which was something. And you could see little tents would crop up along the river. That's where I learned to speak the Russian language for the first time. I went into one of the tents, and I was going to order a beer. How hard can that be? Beer, please. Piva, pожалуйста. And I asked the waitress, and she said, Какой? And that means what kind? And I said, Heineken, and she said, Нет, and I knew what that meant. So I remembered there's a Russian beer called Baltica. I said, Baltica beer, please. And she said, what kind? Какой? And Baltica makes 16 different beers. They're numbered 0 to 15. So I knew how to say 7. So I said, Baltica beer, number 7, please. She shook her head and walked away, and I felt very good. I finally spoke Russian to a Russian, did business, and she brought me 7 beers. So I evidently said something wrong, but I was trying to learn the language. We decided to be a good neighbor in the community where we operated. We went to the Andy Warhol Art Museum, which is located in Pittsburgh, and got the curator there to put together an exhibit that we took to St. Petersburg, Moscow, and Samara. I voted against this when I was I still am on the board of the Alcoa Foundation, and I thought it was a misuse of funds, that the money could have been used better for poor people, veterans, ecology, cleaning up the streams and rivers, etc., fixing the schools. I was wrong. The Russians love their culture, music, dance, art. And they came out in droves for the art exhibit and really appreciated it. So much so that we actually brought a second art museum, art exhibit through Russia while we were there. When I went to Russia, we knew we had to upgrade these facilities. We paid $257.5 million for the facilities, and we knew we had to spend another $750 million over the next few years. The first year, I had a capital budget of $100 million. I spent $20 million. Does anyone want to guess why? Why would you spend 20 if you had a $100 million budget? Can you think? Anyone? Think about that. You go to Russia, and your corporation gives you $100 million. I'm going to staff meetings. My peers are saying to my boss, give me a works money, I'll spend it. Yeah, the heads of Australia and China and U.S., Brazil, they wanted my money. You think? Anyone? Get an idea? What do you think of when you think of Russia? Corruption, bad corruption, everywhere along the supply chain. Everyone has their hand out. It's the reason O'Neill wouldn't go there in '96. And if you don't pay, the supply chain doesn't move. We went in with the values, with the Alcoa values. Says we're not going to participate in it. We don't condone it. We're not going to do it, period. That's hard. So as an example, we're bringing an aerospace plate furnace in from Ebner in Germany. It's coming on 6 trucks. It goes into the city of Belaya Kalitva. The mayor comes out, and he stops the 6 trucks. And he said, I see all this money coming in my city. I want some. And I've determined it's $25,000 US. And if I don't get it, the trucks don't move. What do you do? Well, if you have your values, you don't do anything. You tell him you're not getting paid. You're not getting a kopeck. And then you hope he lets the trucks go. And 4 days later, he let the trucks go. But we had it everywhere. In the Import-Export Office, you have to bring everything into the Import-Export Office. Somebody runs that office. They want paid before they release the goods. It's just a normal course of practice. Culture in Russia. If you have power and you don't exert it to make yourself rich, you're an idiot. If you're in a stream of cash and you don't take some, you're an idiot. That's hard to break. And I don't want to be hypocritical because this country ran that way 100 years ago. In fact, if you go on the south side of Chicago, you might have some issues around that. But that's the way it ran. And it was hard. And this was hard. This is also my pocketbook, by the way. My bonus is based on execution of the plan, which included a $100 million capital plan that year, not 20. Wow. So now it's coming out of my pocket. Pretty interesting. Do you stick to your guns or don't you? My boss in New York City, he pounds on the table, says, you do whatever it takes, but get that investment done. We need to make the product on the new machines. That's tough. He's not stupid enough to say pay the bribes, right? But the insinuation is sure there. My Russian friends were telling me we can negotiate that $25,000 payment down to 20 or 15 and pay it. Yeah. And at the same time, you're trying to teach the values. Well, something happened. This was our approach, and we stuck to it. About 18 months later, it was like a curtain lifted. The supply started to move. And you can see in the later years, we really spent the money. 100 the next year, 167 million the year after that, and 186 the year after that. People realize you don't get paid from Alcoa. I'm not naive enough to think that if we were a small company, we could have stuck to our guns. But we were a big company, and we had bought the first industry of strategic importance to the Russian government. We needed the Duma's approval to do this, which was pretty big. But we did it. And then we had the federal government looking over our shoulders. I would complain to them periodically that the cronies out in the regions are trying to extort us, but the regions don't pay much attention to the federal government. I think that helped a little bit. But I think by sticking to your guns and letting people know you're not going to do that, they finally gave in, and the supply chain started to move. And we were able to make the investments that we wanted to work on. But I'll tell you, it was a tough first year. I wanted to show you some of the investments. That's a slitting machine that goes at the end of a rolling mill. It's as good as any that you'll find in the world. We actually had the U.S. ambassador to Russia, Bill Burns, come down from Moscow to Samara to turn on the machine the first time. This is the coating line, the one that makes the coated aluminum sheet to make aluminum cans in Russia. This is the best coating line in the world, and it's located in Samara, Russia, and a lot of people come to see that. I want to show a pump house. If you've ever been in a manufacturing plant, your pump house is probably one of the dirtiest rooms that you go into. It is gritty and grimy and greasy and dirty. The people in the pump house saw everything being cleaned by Alcoa and other places, housekeeping getting put into place, the safety was turning around, and they wanted to clean the pump house. So they asked for paint, red, blue, yellow, gray paint, and we gave it to them, and they cleaned up the pump house to the point that it was this clean. That's absolutely amazing. But it shows that even housekeeping can become contagious. These plants I mentioned were a safety disaster. We made safety a priority. We taught 8,000 of the employees about safety in the first year, starting at the top of the corporation and working down. We brought safety auditors from around the corporation, around the world, brought 62 expats into the operation who could bring the Alcoa values in. The first full calendar year that Alcoa was in Russia, there were no fatalities. The Russians will tell you that was luck. That wasn't luck. That was good hard work and effort. Today, these 2 Alcoa facilities in Russia have gone over 5 years without a fatality. Their lost workday rate and total recordable rate are lower than the Alcoa average. I attribute that to the successor that I had, a Russian national, MD, by the way, that couldn't make money in medicine, so he switched to run a can plant in Russia. I met him because he was one of my customers, spoke English, sent him around to Alcoa facilities around the world, and then hired him. He had values that were uncharacteristic of some of the Russian businessmen, and he adopted safety and has carried it on, which is pretty good. So I'm really proud of what's been able to happen in the Russian operation. They're very profitable right now. Can sheet is their major product. It's 75% of the production. And now the market for cans in aluminum in the big cities is about 40%. They're still selling a lot of glass and PET, but 40%, that's pretty good penetration in a short period of time. So I asked the question, can a leader be successful in Russia while being honest, playing by the rules, respecting the environment, and making worker safety a top priority? It's a rhetorical question, of course. I don't believe a leader can be a leader long-term unless they do all of those things. And it really, as you're teaching in your business school now, it's a lot more than just the profit and loss. It's a lot more than just the production of the material. It's a lot more than sales. It's being a good neighbor in the community. It's doing what's right. It's setting the example, being the favored employer to work for, et cetera. You have to do all of that to really be a leader long term, and I firmly believe that. I'm going to switch gears again and get into some specific ethical examples. Here's an extreme one. You hear that you're the business unit president, and you hear that your HR manager is accepting payments from laid-off employees after she approves their attractive severance packages. Imagine that. You hear, you know you have to lay off a lot of employees. By the way, this is a real example, happened in Russia. Imagine the to-do list we had was this big, so we had a lot to do. And we sat in a room one day and said we have to lay off a lot of employees. What is the severance requirement? And the severance requirement was that you have to give them 2 weeks' pay under Russian law, not very much. We said under Alcoa's fair compensation policy, we should probably give them more. And we decided 3 months was fair. So we put in a policy of 3 months' pay rather than 2 weeks. And a lot of the Russians, the workforce, weren't making much money. They never saw that much money before, which is interesting. So the HR manager says, I'll handle the layoffs myself. And the way she did it was call in individual employees and say, you can get 2 weeks' pay or you can get 3 months' pay, and it's up to me. And if I give you 3 months' pay, you have to give me a kickback. Believe it? That can't happen in a company like Alcoa. Yes, it can. How about that? Isn't that amazing? Extortion of your own employees as they're losing their job. But think of the to-do list that we had. When it was this long, and she said she was going to handle that, we said, fine, that's yours. We're going to focus on the other 7 million things that we're going to work on. What a shame. So what would you do if you got this report? Anybody? What was that? Fire her? You're going to give her 2 weeks' pay or 3 months' pay? Okay. No. First, in an ethical situation, the first thing you do is gather the facts. And you often find in ethics there's 5 sides to a story, not one. So you gather the facts, you find out these are all true. Now what do? You fire her. You bet you fire her right away. In fact, if that happens in the U.S., if that would happen here, you would then bring an action against her for recoveries of the money. So I go to the general counsel we had in my operation. I asked Evgeny, what do we do? Should we bring an action against her? He said no judge or jury would see anything wrong with what she did. How about that? Would you make the employees whole, the ones that were extorted? Sure. If you really wanted them to be compensated, you'd make them whole. So we went to all the employees that were laid off and asked if they were extorted. Of course, all of them said they were extorted, whether they were or they weren't, which is interesting. But I give this example as one blatant example that just can't happen in a good company, right? Yes, it can. But how do you find out about this? This was interesting. When I first went to Russia, I was the big boss, so I got the big office, right? Really big, almost the size of a football field. It has a desk at one end, a table that runs forever. And beside me was a conference room just about the same size. Behind me was a little conference room that sat about 25, leather chairs, refrigerator, and the good old Russian boys probably sat there, drank vodka, smoked cigars, and made decisions, right? And then I had a lavatory that was just mine, 30 feet by 30 feet by 30 feet black marble, just for me. So I'm in the fortress. To get into my fortress, there was a door that was that thick, beside a door that was that thick. So you had to go through. First, you had to get past the 2 secretaries that were protecting me. Then you had to get through those 2 doors, and then you came into the fortress. If I was still in there, I doubt that the young English-speaking clerk in the HR department would have fought her way through and told me, you might want to look into this. Instead, I decided I'm going to go into an open office concept. put myself and my direct reports into cubicles, converted a theater about this size into cubicles, and went in there. Intentionally put it in a place where traffic had to come through, and one of the traffics was the HR department. This young clerk in the HR department felt free to walk up to me and say, "This might be going on, you might want to look into it." How about that? It says a lot about the environment you have to have in order to be receptive to listening in some of these ethical situations. So I'm fortunate that I did something like that. But examples like this can't happen. What if it's reported to you? I was head of safety for Alcoa. It was reported to you that a new plant manager we had in an Australian plant who was recently hired to succeed as business unit president. But before they're going to promote him into that job, they wanted him to get business experience at an Australian plant. He was having tremendous early success. He was increasing the net income. His working capital was being reduced. He was getting procurement savings, had great delivery performance to the customers, and employee engagement scores were up. But the report was that this guy is spinning the safety results. In a company like Alcoa, where safety is pretty important. So what do? Gather the facts. That's right. So I got the best safety reporter in the whole company. It was a woman named Donna Toothman in Tennessee. I sent Donna to Australia and said, "Donna, look into this." She called back in 7 days. She said, "I found 52 incidents that have not been reported." By the way, 48 were minor medical treatment cases, but 4 were recordable safety cases. In each instance, she talked to the victim and the safety manager. In each instance, they were instructed by this plant manager not to report the incident. So the guy didn't report to me. He reported to a group president, to a business unit president who reported to a group president. So he took the report, packaged it together, and sent it to those 2 guys who were his bosses to see what they were going to do. So they decided to hold a meeting in New York City and invited me to the meeting. And the question was, do we have to fire him? What would your answer be? Of course. You say yes. Why? Exactly right. Yeah, if it's really a value, you have to enforce the value. A question you might ask ahead of time was he's a new employee. Was he fully aware of what was going on? Well, new plant managers to Alcoa go to training. It's called new plant manager training, and we've interviewed them when they come out, and they remember 2 things from that training. One is, don't mess with safety in Alcoa. The second is, by the way, don't mess with audits in Alcoa. If you fail an audit in Alcoa, you have to go to the audit committee of the board of directors and explain what you're doing about it. If you fail 2 audits in Alcoa, your successor goes to the audit committee meeting and explains what they're doing about it. But so he knew about it, and you bet. But what do you think my answer was to the president? Do we have to fire him? My answer was no. I said, he's already fired himself. Now, 61,000 employees are watching you 2 to see what you do about it. We're to try to make our bosses better bosses, challenge them. And we can do that. Of course they took him out. Of course they fired him. And even though he was in a remote location in Australia, you think that word doesn't filter throughout the corporation? And what an opportunity to reinforce your values. If you really believe it, act that way. If they'd have slapped him on the hand and said, "Don't do that again," that would have reverberated throughout the corporation also. And meanwhile, there's a new CEO in the company that would have said, "Yeah, Klaus doesn't care about safety anymore. He let him get away with something like this." So it was a real opportunity to reinforce what your values are. So when you get these situations, sometimes you wrestle with them. They're not easy, but they are opportunities. And they're opportunities to reinforce what you really believe in. What if an investor banker visits you and shows you a way that your company can classify certain expenses so they qualify as a credit on your corporate income tax? If you take the action, you're going to save your company $200 million in tax avoidance. What do? I think you have to gather some facts again, even in this one, and find out, is it shady or isn't it? When the consultants come in and they tell you about a deduction or an expense or a credit or others on your taxes, they know how risky it is. You can ask them, if we were sued by the IRS and went to court, what's the likelihood of success in something like this? If they say it's less than 0.5%, do you think you want to take something like that? Or, nobody in the world has ever taken this deduction. We think it's really creative. Or, Or on the other side, they say, this is a deduction that you just haven't taken. You've been blinded, and this is really legitimate. Other companies have taken, it's been adjudicated and found to be legal. Then you have a responsibility to take something like this. I like to put this up. I'm the ethics speaker, so I come into a class and I give this example, and right away the students want to say, you can't do that, only because of the surroundings. It's an ethical situation, it must be wrong. No, it's not always wrong. And that's of the importance of gathering the facts and find out what it is. By the way, I really enjoyed putting the consultants on the hot seat and let them really say, what's the likelihood of this being legitimate or illegitimate? And again, working for Paul O'Neill, I remember one scheme that was presented to him that the consultant said this has about 2% or less chance of success. And O'Neill said, I don't even want to go close to something like that. But others, if they were 30, 40, 50, maybe you have a responsibility to do that. But then you can take the money there and put it into an accrual account. And now the IRS is asking for a list of those accrual accounts that you put aside for some of the shaky stuff that you accrued for. You have to be very careful with that stuff. But you have to gather the facts and find out maybe some of these actions can be legitimate. If you don't directly work for the Alcoa rolling business, but you know they're having a difficult time, you're sitting in the St. Louis airport, and you've sat in the airports where they have a row of seats and the seats behind them. This actually happened to me. I'm sitting in the seats. There's 4 people behind me from Anheuser-Busch, by the way. The largest single contract in Alcoa is the can sheet contract with Anheuser-Busch. They start openly discussing the negotiation that's coming up with Alcoa tomorrow. They're also traveling to Pittsburgh to meet with the Alcoa representatives. What do? Okay, one extreme you can listen. What's the other extreme?
Announce your presence.
Introduce yourself, announce your presence. Do they have any expectation of privacy? No, this is a public place. Are they idiots? Yes, but I'm not asking about that. Yeah, you shouldn't do that. But they're doing it. What do you do? Well, I felt the way someone said, announce your presence. I did. I stood up, turned around. I'm Bill O'Rourke. I work at Alcoa, and shook hands with all 4 of the individuals. I sat back down. They kept talking. Now what do? Think about your moral compass. What's your moral compass tell you? I would bet we get 13 different answers in here. Anything from you still have an obligation to walk away to turn on your recorder. Right? You've provided notice there. The message is you have to listen to your own internal compass. You have to put your head on a pillow at night and go to sleep. You have to get up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror, and feel comfortable with what you see. If you aren't going to be uncomfortable, don't do it. In this one, we're not talking about the law. Under the law, you're entitled to do this and listen in and report back. In fact, I've given this example in a marketing class, and they know you pay tens of thousands of dollars to gather the kind of information you can get for free. Why don't you turn that recorder on, right? Interesting. I felt free enough to take the notes after I provided notification. I've had students take the position you still should have walked away. Perhaps, but that's their moral compass. For them to be comfortable with themselves, they have to do that. An interesting follow-up to this story, I called the marketing manager for the rolling business, Bill Freeman, and said, I have some information for you, and told him how the situation was. Bill's question to me was, did you tell them who you were? Doesn't that say a lot about Alcoa's values, even in other places? That he was not comfortable taking what I was going to tell him unless I put them on notice. I told him I did. He took the information. Very interesting. Yeah, but you have to be careful in these situations. We're going to have situations where people are going to leave notes in a conference room after a negotiation. Can you listen? Can you read those notes? What if they threw them in the trash can? They've now discarded them. What if they leave a folder? Can you open the folder? Come on, it'll almost open itself. These are questions everyone's going to have to wrestle with, including the students here. And if you think about these ahead of time, you can decide, what are my values? I'm not going to take things that don't belong to me, that I don't get rightfully, etc. How would you want to be known after this? What if you were the CEO of that company? How do you want your employees to act? And I think you'd be looking for integrity and honesty and upright conduct. You run an aluminum extrusion business. You have 15 plants around the world. 8 are shut down, and they're for sale. 1 location in Texas hasn't operated for 5 years. It's been shut down for 5 years. Rinky-dink, small location. It sits on a plot of land, 400 feet by 800 feet. Has 1 extrusion press in there. That's all. In fact, it's under a signed sales agreement to sell to a company called Tredegar in California. You just haven't closed yet. You get a call at 5 p.m. from your environmental manager in Texas, and she says, we took a groundwater sample beside this plant and found trichloroethylene in the sample. What do you do? What do you do first? You bet. There's a lot of facts on this one you have to gather. What's this plant in the city of El Campo, Texas? Oh, it was owned by Reynolds Metals Corporation. They own 79 locations around the world, and you just bought them. You did environmental due diligence on 77 of them, not this one. By the way, I still wouldn't. It hadn't run for 5 years. It was a rinky-dink small operation. It's already under a signed sales agreement. Why would you do environmental due diligence? But why would you do a core sample? Well, Alcoa had a consent decree with the state of Texas. It said every 5 years we'll do core sampling around all the properties that we own. So the engineers asked the secretary, corporate secretary, what do we own? And this was on the list. They went out, dug a sample, they find trichloroethylene. Is that bad? Let's ask our health department. Health department said, yes, it's a known carcinogen. If you ingest it, you will get cancer. Are they ingesting it? Yes. There's 125 families in the city of El Campo, Texas, all drinking well water from the same aquifer. And there's trichloroethylene in it. So it's now 5:15, and you've gathered those facts. What would you do? I called our environmental lawyer. Asked Ralph, what do we do? Ralph said, don't do anything. If you do anything at all, you'll be admitting liability. And you don't know that the trichloroethylene came from that plant or not. Interesting advice. What was Alcoa's vision? Do you remember? They aspire to be the best company in the world. Is that what the best company in the world would do? You have 125 families drinking a carcinogen. What would the best company in the world do? What do you think? Bring them water. Anything more? At least notification? Pardon? Clean the site. I did call the remediation people and said, can you find the source? They said it would take 8 to 18 years and we probably couldn't find it. I said, can you clean it up? They said it would take 8 to 18 years and we probably couldn't clean it. Wow. This is a tough one. Interesting. So minimum would be notice. Maybe more action and bringing water. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Alcoa knocked on the door of 125 families, told them what we found, brought them water, the big jugs, and promised to replenish it over the next 3 weeks while we installed filters on their wells that will filter out the trichloroethylene. Interesting. That's $1 million decision. That's the cost of supplying water for 3 weeks and putting on the filters. Should you do that? Should you incur $1 million? At the time, I reported to Paul O'Neill. I didn't have to go to his office and say, what do you think about this? I went to his office and told him what we were doing. And you knew you were going to get all the support in the world because his tone at the top was clear. He wanted you to do what was right. He did want Alcoa to be the best company in the world. Now, fortunate, Alcoa had money. They could afford something like this. But if we didn't, you'd at least provide the notice. You'd at least tell people we found this. Yes? Oh, that was over. Yeah, that was a quick email. Yes, sales off. You don't want this property. Yeah, that was gone. Yeah, that's gone. Yeah. That would have been nice. Yeah, just don't say anything. Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. The rest of this story. 2 weeks later, Erin Brockovich brought her trailer into town. She went to all 125 families, offered to represent them in litigation against Alcoa. All 125 families signed up. None of them said, oh no, they're a good company. They brought us water, put filters on our well, notified us as soon as they found out. No, they all sued us. Cost another $700,000 to defend that litigation. They could never find liability, for sure, but it still cost $700,000 more to defend the litigation. I'll ask classes often, if you lined up all of Alcoa's shareholders, what percent would tell you this was the right action to take? What numbers would you have? What percent would say we want you to do something like that? What do you think? Any numbers? 80? 80? That's my number, by the way, 80. I believe that. But when I ask the business students that, I'm getting numbers of 10 and 15%. That's what they're saying. That's what they believe. We need to let the students know that don't believe everything you read. That shareholder isn't always out for that buck tomorrow. that there might be another side to the shareholder, that they want to invest in valuable, good companies as well. And I believe my number is 75, 80%. I really believe that that's true. And as an investor, I want to invest in companies that are like that as well. I hope that's true. If you're a buyer of electronic equipment for your company and you buy over $200 million of electrical components a year, you place the large order with your largest supplier and a salesperson sends you a gift. Can you keep it? Very good. That's what you should do. What's the policy of the company? First of all, is it illegal? Probably not in some jurisdictions, depending on value and other things. But what is the policy in the company? So for most corporations, what do they say? De minimis. Yes, usually it says you cannot give or receive a gift that's more than nominal value. So now they leave it to you to decide what's nominal. I did run procurement, by the way, for a while. We bought $18 billion worth of stuff. And you can imagine the suppliers would send us a lot of things. I try to value the biggest gift I was offered. I think it was a heavyweight championship match that was being held in Manila. And it was an all-expense-paid trip with a stop-off in Hawaii to go golfing. A 10-day trip to see the heavyweight championship match. Nominal. Well, it's interesting sometimes that people in positions of buying and selling, they will try to justify something that is more valuable as being nominal when it's really not. Or they'll say, I'll get them a gift of equal value, and they'll get a gift here. Every one of our students are going to face issues like this, maybe at a smaller level. They might be in other cultures. And I hear oftentimes if Asians and Mideastern companies typically like to give you a big gift at the end of negotiations. And if you don't take it, you're insulting them. So you really have to take it. And you don't have to take it yourself and take it home. Take it to the corporate reception area and put it there so everyone can enjoy it. Well, I found that if you talk to anyone in any culture and tell them ahead of time, let's not do that gift thing. Instead, at the beginning of negotiation, we'll have a big meal and we'll buy that one. At the end, we'll have another meal and you buy that one. How's that? And we won't do the gift thing. I think they appreciate that. I traveled once with the vice president of international for Alcoa, and we were negotiating a license agreement with a Japanese company. At the end of negotiations, the Japanese gave us each a little box. We opened it up. It was a little radio that had speakers that disconnected, etc. The fellow I was traveling with, unbeknownst to me, opens his big briefcase, and he looked inside, and I looked inside. He had about 5 gifts in there, and he reached in and grabbed one and gave it to the other side. So I asked him later, what was that? He said, well, I knew they were going to give me a gift at the end of negotiations. So I bought 5 gifts of different value, and I put them in my briefcase. When he gave us our gift, I estimated its value and took one that was comparable and gave it back. What a waste of time. He actually went shopping, had different kinds of gifts, etc. Wouldn't it have been nicer to talk about that up front? I find that to be very interesting. But we're going to get these issues on what can you give and what can you take. And it's good to let the students know that they're going to face this. They're going to face it at any level. Can you take 2 tickets to the Steeler game and sit in the private box of Deloitte? Nominal. With a parking pass? Yeah. Interesting. But wrestle with them ahead of time. Let the other people in the department know what the culture is. And if indeed you are a boss and you're in a position to have subordinates, your actions are going to speak louder than your words in this area. If you take things, that's going to be seen, and that'll speak louder than what you say. We had a CEO that actually spoke to the leadership group at Alcoa, and he said it goes without saying that we set our goals and execute our strategy in accordance with our values. And I decided to take exception to that. It doesn't go without saying. As I said before, the tone at the top must be audible. If you're the leader, let people know what you expect. It's very, very helpful. You can have proactive discussions in a lot of these areas or behaviors that'll avoid a lot of the ethical issues if you're smart enough to do these. Or if you have new subordinates, bring them in and tell them about some of the issues you've had in your life and how you've learned from them to try to avoid them. Periodic discussion with employees, such as employees that handle payroll or benefits administration that you can't disclose. Let them know that you can't be cavalier with that information. Even though you deal with it every day, don't leave it on their desk, don't leave it open, etc. Formal compliance programs should be in place at every major organization, and usually is. And annual business conduct surveys give people an opportunity to speak up and say what's wrong or report an incident. Should you publicize punishment in this area? Sometimes. Alcoa has a policy of no tolerance on employees that hit the wrong sites on the internet. You actually sign a separate piece of paper when you come to work for Alcoa. It says, I understand I won't hit the wrong sites on the internet and my employment's at risk if I do. Still, every year, Alcoa terminates about 12 employees for hitting the wrong sites on the internet. They should be terminated for lack of judgment. You know people are watching, and you still do something like that? It's crazy. Should you publicize that and actually put it on your internet that so-and-so just hit the wrong sites and they're gone, have their picture? You don't need to do that. But you can publicize that 12 people were terminated this year for hitting the wrong sites on the internet. Let people know there are sanctions and they are being enforced. You can do that. On occasion, you might want to put a name out there. I know Paul O'Neill did that once. He had a Benedictine nun come to an annual shareholders meeting and accuse him of hurting people at the Mexican plants in the maquiladoras. And Paul O'Neill said that can't be true. If someone's hurt, I hear about it within 24 hours, and I haven't heard about anything there. But he's not stupid, and he sent me to Mexico and said, find out what's going on. I found out there was an inversion one day, and the forklift trucks that emitted carbon monoxide actually gave carbon monoxide poisoning to 273 employees who had to be treated medically. At the end of every week, every business unit president is to send a report to O'Neill, and it's to begin with safety and talk about incidents they had. So I dug out the report for that week, and this business unit president made it sound like they had a big open house and some of the ambulances from the area showed up. He obfuscated that report. Since it was made so big at an annual meeting, was reported in newspapers, Paul O'Neill decided to take him out in an op-ed article in the Wall Street Journal. Editorial page, center column, whole column, talked about Bob Barton, how he raised that business from $100 million to $1 billion, how he was currently the highest profit margin of 16.5% of any business in Alcoa. Very good man, ran a good business, but he crossed the line. He should have reported those incidents, and he should have done it openly to maybe protect other people from the same kind of incident. He's terminated. Wow. By name in a Wall Street Journal. So sometimes you need to do things like that. Rotating assignments, I had a buyer when I was in the purchasing department who came to me and said, I buy rubber. My son just got a job with Shields Rubber Company, but I'll handle it professionally when he calls on me. Nope, not even going to create the appearance of impropriety. You will move to another commodity. We'll put somebody else on the rubber buying and just avoid that conflict completely. You need to educate and train in this area. You need a climate where reporting is not only acceptable, but hopefully encouraged. And sometimes you need that 800 line to make these reports. By the way, the 800 line was how I got the report on the Australian business president suppressing accidents. On the investigation, we asked, why didn't you take it to your boss? They said we did. Nothing was done. So we had to call the anonymous tip line. Can you manage values like you manage procurement and finance and HR? I think so. I really do. And in Alcoa, part of the annual performance review, you review your goals and how you did. But then there's also a comment section. How does this employee behave in accordance with the values? And they actually, that at least leads to a discussion, at least annually, that talks about values behavior, which is good. And can we reward employees based on ethical behavior? We could probably argue that forever. There's as many negatives to that as there are positives, and I think that goes as a fundamental that you should have and not be paid for doing things that are right. My suggested approach is, my first step is you have to identify the issue as an ethical one. An example I give is very smart people sometimes don't identify ethical issues. I had the corporate medical director reported to me at some time. Medical school grad, very smart man. He came back from his wedding. He said, two of his consultants, who he also went to medical school with, Dr. Harvey and Dr. Checkaway from Yale and from Washington, each gave him a $2,000 check as a wedding present. Isn't that nice? They were consultants to Alcoa in the epidemiology area. So I suggested to him, I said, Dan, couldn't somebody interpret that as you invited two suppliers to your wedding and they gave you a kickback? And oh, by the way, their checks were identical $2,000 checks. You think they didn't talk about it ahead of time? How much do we have to give him for his wedding? He didn't see anything wrong with that. He said it was the goodness of their heart. I at least got him to see that it might look wrong if all those facts appeared in the front page of the New York Times. And he agreed to give the money back. But these situations can happen. So the first step is you better realize you have an ethical issue. And I think that comes from courses like Business 101, that students, 18, 19-year-old students, are starting to realize, geez, these are fraught with issues, or can be, and you better face up to them. So that's step one. After you identify it as an ethical issue, you have to gather the facts. And I mentioned before, there's usually 5 sides to an ethical issue. And oftentimes, the people that are involved in this aren't the ones, the person being accused and the other. It's the 61,000 employees that are watching what's happening. Look at the options. Look at who are the affected parties, which might be all the employees, consequences of your actions, obligations you have, character and integrity of people involved. Think creatively of what you're doing. A step that I added was to check your gut. You'll have a visceral reaction when something's right or wrong. Listen to it. That's your moral compass talking to you. It's telling you should act in a different way, or at least investigate this to see if it's okay or not. I had a student once suggest to me that checking your gut won't work if you're ethically immature. That's right. But I don't think in these situations we're dealing with 2-year-olds. But sometimes we are. We do have to educate in this area. But I like it as a step to just listen to yourself. Then you have to act. Not acting in an ethical issue is acting. It's condoning the behavior. And you just can't do that. And finally, review. There isn't an ethical situation that I've been involved in that couldn't have been handled better. Remember the first example I had of extortion of the employees? Whose fault was that? That was mine. We changed the severance policy and didn't say anything about it. I should have had an announcement at the front gates of our plants that said, we just changed severance from 2 weeks to 3 months. If you lose your job, you're going to get paid there. Would have avoided the whole problem. Instead, I let that big to-do list get in my way. But as I review all the ethical situations, you usually find out you can learn from this and actually handle it even better in the future. Some final thoughts. If something looks wrong or feels wrong, either one, don't do it. Let people know the rules up front, even on the giving and receiving gifts. Let people know that when they join your organization, that you might get faced with this. Here's what the rules are. Be outspoken and very quick when you spot an ethical issue. I believe people should be looking at their watch on ethical issues, not their calendar. Tell the truth. Listen. Oftentimes people are trying to tell you what the ethical issues are, and they can't. Be fair to everybody concerned. And leaders' actions establish the culture. Not what they say, it's what they do. And if you're in doubt, seek advice. And a couple final ones, I like to suggest that people should seek true north. True north is the ultimate, it's a theoretical limit. So in safety, what would true north be in safety? 0 incidents. No, true north is further than that. After you think as far as you can, think further. So in safety, it would be sending your employees home healthier than they were when they came to work. That's true north. You think as far as you can. And it's possible. You can have diet and exercise programs, smoke cessation programs, you stress relief, good food. It can be done. In a procurement organization, I would ask, what's the least you can pay for goods or services? And they would suggest 0. And I said, no, your suppliers pay you for the privilege of doing business with Alcoa. So this is ridiculous. But it's a good exercise. After you've set your goals and you set your objectives, stop and pause and ask yourself, have I thought far enough? And if you haven't, think further than that if you can. I suggest we should build and practice excellent habits. There's a great book that came out last year by Charles Duhigg. It's called The Power of Habit. In the book, he suggests that habits are very hard to break, and they are. So why not build good ones? If the good ones are hard to break, build good ones. If you build bad ones, they're going to be hard to break too, but why not build the good ones? And finally, get the most out of every day and every minute, all of our life. I look at life like a great big hourglass, and every instant comes through like a grain of sand. Just grab that grain and get everything you can out of this instant. So when you let it go, you don't have any regrets. And then when you get my age and you look at the pile, hopefully there's few regrets sitting there in the pile. I like the quote that says, integrity and trust are the currency of business and the foundation of lasting relationships. I really believe that. When Paul O'Neill's chief financial officer retired, he needed a new chief financial officer, and he interviewed a bunch of people. And then he came back and he said, I need integrity. That's all I'm looking for in a CFO. I have it in the fellow who was his general counsel at the time. He said, I'm going to teach him debits and credits. I want a man of integrity as chief financial officer. And he was named best chief financial officer in America about 3 years later by CFO magazine. Incredible. But I found out that is really our foundation. I want to thank you very much and leave you with one sign I saw in a church. Honk if you love Jesus. Text while driving if you want to meet him. Yeah. Thank you very much.